I am Sam Harrison. I'm the Director of Operations for Tezos Commons. Really quickly, a little bit about the Tezos project is, of all of the different projects I've ever been part of, or the ones that I've looked at that talk about decentralization, Tezos is probably one of the projects that is the most invested in having decentralization actually happen. So I say this because Tezos Commons Foundation is actually a separate entity than the Tezos Foundation in Switzerland, or a separate entity than the body that does the actual coding and development of the protocol. And it's a separate entity than many other of the services that a a monolithic institution would actually have: marketing, business development, corporate development. And so our responsibility at Tezos Commons has to do with the community building and has to do with the education. Because when we think about blockchains, it really is all about the network effects, right? And so our community and the people who use it and the people who like it and the people who develop on it, it's very, very vital to what makes Tezos work. And so that's what TCF is designed for. So as much as I love blockchain, as much as I love kind of what we do and the fintech space in general, like probably all of us, I would love to write a book one day. And it would be really fun to write a kind of an interesting story about some of the lesser known things that have shaped the universe. There's a fantastic book called The Disappearing Spoon that talks about the historic and the personal stories behind the discovery of the various different elements on the periodic table. I think it would be really fun to write a book that charts these very dry, boring legal institutions and accounting innovations that end up dramatically shaping how we live our lives. If I were to write my book, let's see if this clicker works, I'd focus on 3 different areas. The first one being the invention of double entry bookkeeping. This was the first opportunity that accountants and entrepreneurs and merchants had to actually and strongly validate the value of their company. It was a brilliant introduction. The second one I'll talk about is the invention of the joint stock corporation, the ability to pool capital and create something like the East India Trading Company or the Dutch VOC, was this fantastic ability to really accomplish great things by pooling the capital of people who are interested in it. Now the third one, and I thought that this is a fantastic story, which is why I want to write a book on it, is the invention of time zones. I mean, if you think about the various different pieces that really helped productivity thrive, the ability for railroad timetables to track the arrival and departure of trains across vast distances became vital to unlocking the productivity there in the 1800s, which has been kind of amazing. Now, I have to warn you, we are currently standing, oops, not too many, hang on, back up, one more forward. There you go. We are currently standing in the center of a caldera, a massive volcano. And when it erupts, it will dramatically change the landscape of how we do things and how we process our transactions, our contracts, our interactions with people on digital scale. That innovation is the smart contract. Now, what is a smart contract? We use this term over and over again, and sometimes it kind of devolves into noise. That we don't really understand what it is. Fundamentally, a smart contract is a self-executing contract where the terms of the agreement are directly written into the code. What that enables is that there's a digital automation of certain aspects of traditional contracts. So to really kind of unpack that statement, let's look at one of the most famous traditional contracts that I think exist, which is, okay, this is going too far, the United States Constitution. Now, if you roll the Wayback Machine to the time that this was written, the self-governing bodies of the United States had organized themselves into the Articles of Confederation, right? And that wasn't working for them. And they needed to design a framework, a formal relationship that would work for them. So they all got together and said, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, et cetera, et cetera. It's been a long time since grade school when I used to recite the preamble to the Constitution. But in 4 pages, they revolutionized government. They revolutionized how you can do self-governing bodies. Before that, it was all this monolithic, centralized governance model, and now suddenly it was democratized. And it was democratized in a good way, right? And so you had this ability to have a formalized relationship between parties. Now, when you look at smart contracts, here's the dirty secret about smart contracts. You are actually using them all the time already. Anything that is based in the software as a service business model is leveraging the ability to have certain terms of your contract being modified and executed automatically. So if you think about Amazon, one of their great innovations was this one-click purchase. But what you agreed to in your contract with Amazon was that my payment terms, my delivery terms, the product that I wanted, all of those would be serviced by digital means, right? And so you've seen this already. So the question is, okay, so we've seen this for years. SaaS offerings are massive already. That's the current economic model. So why is it suddenly so important? Why is it suddenly catching fire? And the answer is when you pair it to blockchain. Now, the father of the smart contract, a guy named Nick Szabo, in 1997 talked about where they have the most value. And really, smart contracts have the most utility when they're embedded in property that is valuable and controlled by digital means. This is why they're taking off right now. Because when you pair this flexible, enforceable contract with digital rights ownership on the blockchain in an immutable ledger, suddenly you can do amazing things, and it becomes extremely valuable. And just like your prior inventions of the double entry bookkeeping, just like the joint stock corporation or railroad timetables, you find that there are inefficiencies in the marketplace that you can eliminate. And by eliminating those inefficiencies, you unlock productivity, you unlock value. You're able to create and do more. So where can you find inefficiencies in the modern economy? I mean, we've been doing business and we've been doing digital business for generations now. So you would think that all of the inefficiencies are pulled out. But guess what? They're everywhere. They're everywhere you can think of. So let's take one of the #1 verticals or marketplaces that we talk about all the time, which is finance. And let's see in finance if there's any place that you can find an inefficiency that you could unleash that productive power. So let's talk about payment processing. It was touched on a little bit in the panel, how payment processing could be valuable. But by using smart contracts, you can actually settle these payments faster and cheaper than traditional models. The really interesting thing is not necessarily in the United States or the developing world or the developed world, but start thinking about the developing world, where credit card institutions and banking are not as established as they are here in the United States or in Europe. But if you think about a place where the main bank is a vendor on the street corner that tops up your mobile card, then suddenly you have an idea about where this can be extremely valuable. Now, I have warnings and caveats because while I'm a huge believer in blockchain, while I jump ship from the traditional into the blockchain, it's very, very early days for blockchain, and a lot of the issues that we are encountering are being worked through. The potential of the technology is amazing, but it requires some things to work through. So for example, with payment processing, working on the scale and the transaction throughput is something that they need to figure out. There are solutions that are being talked about. There are things being worked on that they can solve that problem, but we're not quite there yet. What about remittances? I have a good friend of mine who works very closely with the Philippines, and he talks about the fact that, look, the Filipino market is massively dependent upon the remittances that they get from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, from the United States. But every time you send money via Western Union or another remittance project, they're taking 8 to 10%, 8 to 12% of what you send. Now, if you can eliminate that through the blockchain and you can make it fast and easy, then suddenly the people in the Philippines that are receiving this money get 8 to 12% more. And they can use that to do investment. They can use that to have a better scale of living. They can use that in their own pockets better than somebody like Western Union. This is the one thing I would say about all these inefficiencies. You will find that every single time you talk about an area like this, people lose their jobs. Because what happens is their jobs become redundant, which is actually a good thing because that's what creates more innovation faster and better and stronger, right? But the thing is as we're talking about this, you have to realize that certain industries will no longer have their ability to leech off of the inefficiencies already existing in the market. All right, so what about startup funding? It was talked about, again, just briefly. I was backstage thinking over my talk, so I didn't hear about it, but crowdfunding, right? So you can create, and we saw this in 2017, a massive amount of investment into ICOs, which is effectively crowdsourcing startup funding. Now, massive question. Number one, regulatory scheme. So watch out for what the SEC says, what those regulations are. You don't want to be selling in unlicensed security. Tezos is case in point. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But number two, when you do your investment, the reason why these regulations exist is, in principle, to protect people from losing their money in scams. And so you need to make sure what startup funding does not have, through blockchain does not have yet, is the ability for an individual person like myself to do effective due diligence and to vet the projects really, really well. The same way that an accredited investor would, or the same way that filing for an IPO would help you do. Payroll, I think it was talked about again just briefly in the prior panel. But smart contracts payroll, again, think about it in the sense of you're not in the United States, but you're outside of the United States, and you need to verify that a person has showed up to work. You need to verify that they worked a certain number of hours, and then you need to cut a check and have it delivered into their bank account. The thing is smart contracts are effectively based, in some ways, on an if this, then that sort of programming logic. And so you can set up a contract that when you walk in, you swipe your badge and you say, okay, I'm here at this time. And then on Friday, you swipe out. And it calculates the number of hours that you are working. And then it uses the if this, then that logic and says, okay, you work at $20 an hour, you work 40 hours a week, you get this much money, and it deposits that much money into your bank account, all without a third party. Now, of course, we still need an ecosystem development and adoption to pull that, but that's true with any big startup project. Escrow services are very important. The thing that's really interesting about escrow services is the payment terms and the clear coding. When you think about contracts in general, you think about lawyers. The reason why lawyers get paid so much money is because they're really, really good at writing a good contract. And when you start shifting into smart contracts, you start shifting that weight of being able to clearly write a contract onto the people, the engineers that are coding that. And so when you start doing escrow services on the blockchain using smart contracts, you need to make sure that your programmers really understand what the terms and conditions are of that escrow, when it comes in, why it would leave, and when that happens. Because that's where the devil becomes in those details. Microfinance. Again, talking a little bit about financial institutions shaving off 8 to 12% off of a transaction. If you're dealing with $20, I heard someone say if you're dealing with $10, you lose $3 in the transaction cost. That's horrible, right? But if you have zero transaction cost or very, very limited transaction cost, suddenly you're $20 here, you're $50 there, I was working with my cousin who was working in India at the time, who was giving out $200 loans so people could purchase sewing machines and could start a business doing it as a sewing company. It's a $200 loan to them. But the thing is, if you're taking 10% off of that for your transaction cost, suddenly that model is not as effective as it used to be. So microfinance is a great way. Now, the issue here is usually with microfinance, you're probably not dealing with somebody who has a computer. You may not be dealing with somebody who has a smartphone. They may have a feature phone. And so you need to make sure that when you execute this sort of a contract, you are looking at your target demographic and you're saying, okay, yes, they can use this. They have the ability to access this. All right, now, again, talking about a little bit about people losing jobs. Most people in here say, well, look, some people in here may be saying, look, Sam, I'm not in finance. I drive a truck, right? So blockchain is never going to eliminate my job of driving a truck. I have bad news for you. There are a couple of companies just down the road that are going to eliminate your job as driving a truck. I mean, the whole self-driving car phenomenon is going to be amazing. But as a truck driver, you're very concerned about supply chain management. And so this is an area that can address your particular need. Now, in developing worlds, again, the idea of invoice processing is actually a really big issue, because what you have is have you ever heard the expression, oh, that package just fell off the back of the truck? So you have lost product that just disappears in transit. But if you track that with access to smart contracts and on the blockchain in an immutable ledger that you're scanned in as you put on the truck, you get scanned in when you pass a port, when you get scanned in when you get delivered, suddenly that whole immutable ledger, you have a clear chain of custody to be able to apply to that. Now there's some stats up on the board from an IDC report recently that talked about that there would be a 20% improvement in quality of the product delivered, and that's preventing damage to the products that are delivered. That there's a 1 to 2% reduction in lost, undelivered, or disputed invoices, right? Which is actually a really, really good job, a really good improvement and decrease of inefficiency for the companies who are shipping products, right? Suddenly, that goes directly to their bottom line. They can collect on those invoices. Then there's also this phenomenon of a shadow credit system. I deliver a product that has, the payment is due upon proof of delivery. And that proof of delivery is written on a piece of paper that's then put in the mail, which is then shipped back, and then the invoice is sent back to the company who has purchased the product. And suddenly that's 30 days after I've shipped the product and it's been delivered to me being paid. And so effectively, I've extended credit to the buyer for the purchase of my product. And so there's an entire shadow industry of credit which can be eliminated with the use of this instantaneous smart contract. Chain of custody, I mentioned it just briefly, and what's really interesting is some of the stuff that's come up in the chain of custody idea is actually very, very valuable here in the Bay Area. This idea of farm to table foodstuffs, like making sure that your eggs are coming straight from the farm and directly to your table, or high-priced and exclusive wines. You want to make sure that your wine is actually pressed from the grapes from the specific winery at the specific date, because that's what makes your wine valuable or good. I don't drink wine, so I don't know. But it's something that the smart contracts and blockchains are very, very good for. Now, of course, there's another set, which is this idea of pharmaceuticals. And Big Pharma is looking into how do you track the production to the delivery of a very specific customer, very specific individual. So that can be valuable. And finally, conflict diamonds are a thing. Conflict gold is also a thing. And there's a company who is working to track the gold as it's pulled out of the ground, put into the refinery, put on a truck, and put all the way into the vault. And you can track that. And then somebody can look back and audit those records and say, oh, by the way, yes, 100% this is conflict-free gold. So other significant verticals, decentralized applications. We've seen this already a little bit. If you think about Web 2.0, if you think about the idea of Facebook and LinkedIn and a lot of these other Web 2.0 companies, that's your data. They're crowdsourcing their product off of you. And it's going into a centralized building that says, okay, now we're going to sell it in a certain way. Imagine flipping that script a little bit and saying your data actually belongs to you. And you get to control who uses it and who accesses it, and then you get to be paid for it. Now, right now, the model is centralized, big Facebook, big brother, owns all that stuff, and they'll make money on it, and you won't see a dime, but you'll keep on being there because of the network. But if we decentralize that actual application, you can run that whole thing through smart contracts about what data you want to release, about how much you want to be paid for it, and then the advertisers will say, yes, I will pay $5 to you for your location data, and we'll pay $2 to the actual organization that brokers that deal. So decentralized application. Now the other interesting thing is voting and elections. This is an immutable ledger, so you're not going to have a problem with hanging chads, right? So you won't. Now there are other issues that you have to deal with in the process, but this helps you have a clear record of voting. One of the very important pieces is that clear record right now is also not anonymous. It's one of the dirty secrets of blockchain is everyone thinks about anonymity as being a thing. It's pseudo-anonymous, no, synonymous, no. It's almost anonymous. It's tracking your transaction number, right? So I have an account number with Tezos 12345, and every single time I do a transaction, 12345 is associated with that. I don't want that associated with my voting block, because that's a very easy way to track back and make my vote actually very, very suspect, and somebody can come and break my knees because I voted for the wrong, person. That's more mafia than anything else. Anyway, but the point is, there are ways to anonymize your voting data, and there are ways to make sure that the people who are not have access, just like kind of what we talked about earlier about microfinance. We have to make sure that the people who do not have access to computers have the ability to still vote on the blockchain, and that's a simple solution. We do it right now. People show up to a central location and put in their vote. Legal, I love this idea because I went to law school and I don't practice law, but if a contract is not worth more than $100,000, there's no point in suing over it. And there is an entire universe of contracts that are not worth $100,000. And if you put them on a self-executing code, then you can enforce them. It does it itself. Okay, so really quickly, I want to make sure that when we are building these new structures, when we are removing inefficiencies, it's very, very important to use the best tools that are available. And this is where Tezos comes in. So Tezos was built from the ground up to be a smart contracting platform that saw a handful of problems with existing smart contract platforms. The first of which is the method in which you come to a consensus about what's on the transaction block. The one that everyone hears about is something called proof of work that uses a mathematical algorithm to say, okay, we know, we have an idea of what this mathematical algorithm is. You solve it, you get first in line, you have to use your resources to get there. Tezos uses something called a liquid proof of stake, right? So your dollars are up. Oh, it looks like my time is up. So really quickly, the way that Tezos works is that it has liquid proof of stake, on-chain governance, and it has something called formal proof available in the contracts. So it allows you to actually formally prove the logic in your system that your smart contract is accurate. So that's Tezos, and that's the future of smart contracts. So thank you very much.
Excellent, Sam. Yeah, before we let you go, is there any quick questions?
Sure. Any questions from the audience? It must have been really, really good. No questions.
Oh, we got one.
Oh, we got one? Here we go. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. So at the beginning, you said smart contract plus blockchain make the big change, and it's really relevant for property that can be controlled in a digital manner. Mm-hmm. I guess today there's very few actually that we can control in a digital manner. I mean, except from like say storage or computing power, but a property is or a car, or
right.
None of this is on the blockchain or controllable in a digital manner. So
right. None of them are yet as a digital asset. And this is the thing that's really interesting to look at, is when we talked about escrow services, I bounced off this, I didn't get into it, but there is a world in which your title to your home has been put on the blockchain because it's an immutable ledger. Now, instead of being relying when you buy or sell a house, having that title insurance where somebody, you pay them $3,000 to $5,000 to go and make sure that no one has a mechanic's lien or a plumber's lien, or you actually have the right to sell your house. You can put that on the blockchain, and that automatically eliminates that entire industry of the title insurance, because and you can see very clearly what that's available. Now, as we are advancing, more and more digital assets are coming online. In 1999, I think it was, there was a great little invention called Napster, where they realized that they were copying and redistributing songs on a peer-to-peer network. Now, at that time, it was called stealing, it was called breaching copyright, but if you put those ownership records on the blockchain as a digital asset, suddenly you could control who owns it, who plays it, and then the royalties flowing back to the actual artists. It would no longer have to be oh, you're stealing it. It would be, oh no, my Britney Spears song I've actually given to Brett, and now Brett gets to play it. I don't play it anymore because I don't have access to it.
You're right, I do love Britney.
Yeah, I figured as much, right? So there are a lot of use cases where controlling and using the digital asset are dramatically increasing. That quote was actually from 1997. So it was before that entire movement started, and you're seeing it more and more as time goes on.
Let's take one more
question.
I'm familiar with like proof of stake. Is liquid proof of stake different, or is it just a different way of saying proof of stake?
So it is proof of stake. It is slightly different. So a lot of people talk about proof of stake and then delegated proof of stake. And the way that delegated proof of stake is that you actually, for example, EOS, you have to take all of your initial coins that you got in the fundraising or the ICO, and you hand them over to a delegation service. And then the delegation service does that on your behalf. The way that Tezos works is, as a liquid proof of stake, you have the option yourself to validate transactions on the blockchain, or you can send it over to a delegation service. The reason why this is important is Tezos requires you to use 10,000 of the tokens to be a baker or a validator. Now, not everyone has 10,000. In fact, the average wallet on Tezos is about 2,300, and so that wouldn't make sense for the vast majority. But you do have that option, right? And so that's why it's a liquid proof of stake. It's the same model of proof of stake, but it's the ability to do it yourself or delegate.
Excellent. Big round of applause for Sam here.